dipped our toes into Photoshop, and now it's time to jump in head first. So this tutorial is going to be fairly lengthy, so you might want to, break it up into chunks after doing, one of the, like modifying one of the images. Maybe think about taking a break, trying it out on your own, just so you don't get overwhelmed with this. But what I want to show you is basically how to create a surreal landscape so that our elements of our design, our different different parts of different images look kind of integrated, like they really sort of belong in the image, even though it might be very fantastical or surreal. We still want it to look, we still want things to look like they belong there and offer some modicum of believability. So all of the files that I'm using are in a folder called a zipped folder called surreal.zip on the in the course tools, the course content, of Blackboard. You'll see that here is called Photoshop Tutorial Surreal Landscape. When you click on that, depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, it should start to download. It might ask you if you want to open the file with like a disk utility. Click OK. The reason it's asking that is because it's a zipped folder. It's a folder with a bunch of other files in it, and it has to unzip before you can see all of this stuff in it. So right here, if I just double click, it just opens on its own. Basically makes a copy of the file now as an actual folder that we can look inside. So there's quite a few photographs in here that we're going to be using, but this is what we're trying to accomplish. So we have this photo of the Art Building Center for Visual Arts at the Kent campus, and I just pulled this from the website, and then we have a couple of other photographs here and some other imagery that we're going to be adding. Some of the things are very noticeable, like whatever the heck this thing is. There's a big window that's just kind of on the side of the building. We have like the inside of a refrigerator over in these windows. A flag up at the top that's not there in the original image. These jars of lemons that are inside of the building. The clock up in the left corner here that's supposed to look like it's sort of fading into the clouds. And then a roller coaster, which is definitely not actually there on the Kent State campus. So this is, this is what we're trying to go for. And again, trying to make things look as believable as possible. Also, the idea here is that we have some things that are really in your face, right? Like this big thing is kind of noticeable right away. The clock up in the top left. But a lot of times when people first look at this, they might not even notice like the roller coaster or these lemon jars. So the idea here is that we have a variety of things going on in this photograph or in this image, and that's something to really keep in the back of your mind when you get to your actual Photoshop surreal landscape project. Think about doing some things that are big and kind of in your face and really noticeable, and then maybe some other things that are small and bring people in. Once they start to notice weird things happening in this photograph or in this image, they want to look more closely to see what other kind of little Easter eggs are hiding around. So again, I have some large elements. There are some smaller elements spread out all over the image, right? So we don't have all these things lined up somewhere, stuff up in the top and the bottom, all along, everywhere. Even letting things go off the page is not a bad idea, like this roller coaster. When we take a photograph, things get cut off naturally because, the landscape or whatever continues. We don't want to try to put all of our collage elements inside of the frame of the photograph. Usually we want to let some things go off the frame. It looks a little more natural that way. So what we're going to do is open all of these files in Photoshop. I'm going to just drag a box around all of them so they're all together. And I'm just going to click on any one now. And you can either right click and open with Photoshop, or you can drag them down to the Photoshop icon on your dock. If you have a PC, you might have to open Photoshop first, but then down on your taskbar, you'll be able to drag and drop files there. At least you should. So here is our main image. The first thing I would suggest that we always do when we're trying to do a realistic Photoshop collage is a very simple thing called image auto contrast. And if we go to image auto contrast, basically what's happening is Photoshop is analyzing the image. It's looking for really dark pixels and really light pixels. And if it's not finding a good mix, it's going to make the darkest ones darker and the lightest ones lighter. If you do that, you might notice that the image changes a little bit. It actually looks better, I think. Every once in a while, if you do that and it looks worse, just edit and undo. And, you don't necessarily have to stick with that change that it made. So this is going to be our background image. This is going to be the canvas onto which we are going to collage all of our other elements. I'm just gonna save this thing as a Photoshop document right now, so that every time I add new elements to this, I can just save the project without having to sort of rename it, especially the first time. So I'm just gonna do File, Save As. And basically, I want to name this thing, I'm just going to name it King _ photo, let's see, Surreal Tutorial. Now, I'm just doing this as a tutorial. This is not something you have to do and turn in. This is only for you to learn sort of how to use some of these tools and techniques. So I'm going to go up here and make sure it is a Photoshop format, not a JPEG, which is what it said before. And I'm going to put it onto my desktop. Click Save. And voila. My new image is now called King _ Surreal Tutorial.psd. And I'm going to double click the hand tool, which I mentioned in the previous tutorial, previous tutorials, I think. That just kind of zooms your image in and makes it fit as large as it can on your screen. Now, when doing a tutorial like this, it really doesn't matter what order you do things in. It's completely non-linear. We could start with the flag, we could start with the clock, or anything else. Because, typically I like to start with the largest objects if possible. And what I mean by that, or what is going to be the largest thing that I collage onto this? You don't have to follow this, but for me, it just sort of makes sense to start with the bigger things and maybe end with the smaller things. So it's going to be that window that's going to show up right here. That is called window.jpg. So here is the original image. This is a the window and the roller coaster are both images from Geauga Lake up in Aurora, or wherever it was that's closed down. And FYI, yes, if you sort of break in there to take photos of the roller coaster and things, you may get the cops called on you. Just FYI, according to a friend. Anyway, so how are we going to get this window and this sort of blue ledge underneath into our other image? Up to this point, I've only really talked about the marquee, which is going to be okay. I might be able to sort of do that, but it's not going to be absolutely perfect. So I might be able to do that with a marquee, but I'm not going to be able to get the blue the blue shelf at the bottom because it's not rectangular shaped. So we're going to have to do something completely different. I'm going to hit Command D, Control D on a PC. That will get rid of your marching ants. I've mentioned that several times. You can go to Select, Deselect as well. Anytime you have marching ants and you need to redo something, that's what you're going to want to do. So for this, we're going to use a tool called the Quick Selection tool. And it is hidden under this little icon here. What is it? The fourth tool down from the top, called the Quick Selection. Now, the Quick Selection tool is a brush. Brushes in Photoshop have a diameter, and a lot of times they have a hardness and some other things. We'll be getting to other brushes a little bit later. But first thing I want to do is I want to have a fairly large brush. I need to select a big chunk of this image, and this is a pretty tiny brush. All of the tool parameters are up here at the top, so I'm just going to make it pretty big. Like, I want it, something like this is probably, it might be a little bit too big. Let's say about 130 pixels or something. And what I'm going to do is just kind of start to drag around inside of this window. And basically, the Quick Select brush works based on contrast. So what it did is, as I dragged around on the inside, it found that this rectangular sort of part of this image is sort of darker than what's around the outer edge. So it just found the edges for me. And again, I barely am moving my brush right there, and it found that entire chunk of imagery all at once. And I come over here, and it finds all of that. I have to make sure that I don't have little tiny marching ants inside of this area here. I want it to be one giant shape. Then I'm going to kind of come around the edge here. And if you notice too, I'm not getting really near the white part that I don't want. If you just move your brush just barely into the area, it's going to find what you want. And here's the thing. If it goes outside of the area, like, oops, now I have marching ants over here. Do you have to undo? No, you do not have to undo that. The reason is, when you're first using this brush, it is set to add everything that you color over to the marching ant selection. If I hold Option on my keyboard, it's really hard to see in this video, but you might see it better on your own screen when you do this. When I'm not holding Option, inside of that brush is a little plus symbol. When I hold Option, it turns to a minus. And basically now, wherever I color, it's going to subtract that area from my selection. So very often when I'm using the Quick Select brush, my finger is actually kind of hovering over the Option button at any time, so I can just hold the Option button down and get the stuff that I don't need, like all of this down here. And I'm holding Option to subtract that area from my image, from my selection, sorry. So anyway, I got my marching ants pretty good here. They're going around the image. If this is going to take a minute to get the hang of it. So if something screws up, hit Command D, get rid of your marching ants, and maybe start over. Now I could technically copy and paste this into our Surreal background. But what's going to happen is, when we do that without doing this very important other step, it's going to look like a sticker on our image. It's not going to have a soft edge. It's going to be like a little too crisp, and it's going to really look photoshopped. That's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So what we want to do is we want to soften the edges of our selection a little bit. And this is very important that you do this every single time you make a selection. Otherwise, again, it's going to look like little stickers all over your assignment, and things aren't going to look very integrated. When we take a photograph, the edges of objects are softened. They're kind of slightly blurry or out of focus. That is normal. That's what happens when we take a photograph. If we start to collage elements into our design that are too crisp, they're gonna stand out. They're not gonna look consistent. So what we're gonna do is do what's called select and mask. This is gonna show up anytime you make a selection with any tool. It's going to be right up at the top here. Select and mask opens up kind of a new window over here, sort of a new menu. And we want to do a couple of things first. Now, first of all, what I'm going to do is I don't want to view it the way I'm viewing it. Like, I can't, this looks so sort of weird here that I'm not going to be able to tell how soft my edges are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the view section here, I'm going to put it on white. And then I'm going to increase the opacity to 100%. What that does is it's basically showing me only my selection, and it's on a white background so that it's not on top of the original image anymore, and we can kind of see it separated from that image. You might even notice that the quick select tool is built right in here. So if I notice some things here where things have gone off the edge a little bit, even if it's these tiny little things, I could hit my hold option. I could color out that little block there. I could color out this little blue line at the bottom. So basically the quick select tool is built right in. What we want to do is what's called smoothing and feathering the edges. Smoothing jagged edges, basically, what happens when you're selecting something with a quick select tool, some of these other tools, it's following the pixels. Even though we can't really see that because we're zoomed out, what it does is it actually creates a pretty jagged edge. So smoothing that edge helps. I'm just going to smooth it to about 50. I'm just kind of guessing here. Not really guessing. I've done this a million times, so I kind of know what's going to happen. But let's try that and see what happens. Feathering the edge softens the edge of the selection even more. And by softening it, it actually makes the edge of your selection slightly transparent, so that when you collage it onto your other background image, it's going to kind of have a slightly transparent edge, producing that kind of blurry edge that we're looking for. We want to only feather it a little bit. If I feather it too much, this is what's going to happen. It starts to look really odd. Like, what is going on? It's softening it so much that it's looking very, very odd. So I'm going to put it at about 2 pixels or so. It doesn't seem like this is doing a whole lot, but actually, if I zoom in to like a corner here, I just grab the zoom tool. So that's what it looks like with the smooth. That's what it looks like with the feathered edge. That's what it looks like without the feathered edge, and that's what it looks like before it's smoothed. So basically, again, smoothing gets rid of some of those jaggy pixels. Feathering softens it a little bit. And then the great thing about this is that you want to scroll down and click Remember Settings. That way, the next time you go to select and mask, all of these settings are going to be here for you, ready to go. You're not going to have to do them all over again. The only time you might need to redo them is if you are getting images from a different source. So for instance, this is from a DSLR camera, and these settings are kind of now set for that type of image. If I get now a lower quality image from the internet or something, these settings might look a little weird. It might be too much, so I might have to back them away. But basically, it's going to remember all that, including the first thing that we did with viewing on white, including the opacity. So the next time we come back here, we don't have to redo all of those things. One thing I'll say about the view on white is this is That's great if it's a kind of a lighter thing, or I'm sorry, if it's a darker thing that you want to view on a white background. If you're trying to select something like a volleyball or something that is white, then it's going to kind of disappear into the white background. And in that case, you can come up here and choose View on Black, and you'll see it on a black background instead. Anyway, we want it on white for now. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to go back to my image. It doesn't really look like the marching ants have done much, have changed. But again, now those parameters that I put in the selected mask are going to be remembered. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back to my tutorial image and paste it. And if I were to zoom in here, again, you can see that things are kind of, soft on the edge. It's a little pixelated, but that's just normal because eventually, when you zoom into an image in Photoshop, you're going to see individual pixels. That's just the way things are. Pixels are one color or another. They're square and they're arranged in a grid, and when you zoom in, you can see each individual pixel. When you zoom out, they become so small, all you see is the image, kind of all together. So there's that. I'm going to rename this layer window. This thing is really large, so not only do we need to make it smaller, but we need to conform it to this shape here. The window is fairly rectangular. This is not. What is it, a rhombus or a trapezoid or something like that? So the first thing I'm going to do is hit Command T, and I'm just going to make this window a little smaller so that it's more manageable. I'm going to get it close to the size I'm going to need it and just kind of put it in this section over here, and I'm going to click the check mark. Now we need to make it fit the shape of that, the side of that building. We're going to need to do the same thing to the fridge that's going on over here. But let me zoom in a little bit. Generally speaking, if you're working with a smaller section of your image, zoom in on it so you can see what the heck's going on there. If you're all zoomed out, you're not going to be able to see any detail. So I need to transform this shape to fit the side of the building. It's going to be hard to tell how the image is conforming if we can't see the side of the building behind it. So I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit. Again, I'm just lowering the opacity. Maybe I'll keep it that way. But right now, it's just functioning to allow me to see through to that layer behind it. Now what we're going to do is go to Edit Transform. There are lots of different transformations that we can make here. Very simple things like rotating. This will rotate the layer 180 degrees. This will rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise by 90 degrees. This will flip it horizontally or vertical. Flipping in Photoshop means mirroring. So you can flip something and you'll basically have a mirror image of what it used to be. We have scale, but we can do that by just hitting Command T. That's going to allow us to change the scale or the size of a layer. We can also rotate things by hitting Command T. So I don't know why they're here. It's kind of superfluous. But we could also skew and we can perspective things. Now, skew is basically going to only allow the image to be changed into kind of, I guess, a... well, actually, let me show you here before I even get to that. Skew is going to basically allow you to do this. And this is kind of great, but it is really not giving me very many options. So basically what I want to do is go to Edit, Transform, Distort. And now I can kind of pull that corner there. I'm going to pull this corner over here. I'm just kind of looking to see where I think I want this. And I can pull this corner over here. Basically, if you need any, layer to conform to a basic four-sided shape, geometric shape, this is what you can use to do that. And so, again, I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this thing or how I'm going to do it, but I kind of want it to look sort of like this. Trying to get it to fit in there as much as I can. The more you zoom into this, the more accurate you can get with how you drag this. But that doesn't look too bad. Whenever we're doing a transformation, we want to hit the check mark after we're done. The check mark is going to commit your transformation. Now I could either leave it like this, or I could put the opacity all the way back up to the way it was. To me, that looks a little, I don't know, that looks kind of interesting. I like the opacity dropped a little bit. I don't know. It's not quite as high in contrast. You start to see these other windows through. It starts to look a little odd. So there's that. So anytime, again, you need to conform things to a sort of a geometric four-sided shape, that's what you're going to want to use. There are a couple of other things in there that we'll get to at some other point. So now that's it. We're done with that particular part of our image. It is at any point, if we want to go back, we could go back to that same transformation and fix it. We can move it around with the move tool if we wanted to, do whatever else we want to it. I'm just going to hit Command S. On a PC, it would be Control S. That is going to save your document. So if something completely, if the computer crashes or Photoshop locks up, you're not going to lose your file. You always are going to want to be saving very often. If you're working on something for an hour and a half and haven't saved it and Photoshop crashes, there's not much you can do about that. And all I can say is you should have saved it. So basically make sure you're saving it all the time. I'm going to go back to this window image now and just close out of it. There's so many tabs open. Why the heck do I need things open that I don't want anymore? But when I close out of it, it's going to say, hey, do you want to save the changes to this? It remembers that you did an auto contrast, and that's why it's asking me to save it. I'm going to say, no, don't save. And now I can move on to the next step. I guess since we're on that same distortion train, let's do the fridge. And the fridge here, I am going to use the rectangular marquee. And I think that's going to work good for this, or work well, because it is pretty much a rectangle. I'm not going to overthink this too much. I could try to get in there with the quick select tool, but it might be sort of difficult. This might be a good application for the Marquee tool. However, I do want to go to Select and Mask. Once again, all of my settings are there. I can see it has a fairly soft edge, not too shabby. It looks pretty good, so I'm going to click OK. I'm going to copy and come back here and paste. Rename that fridge. One thing I'm going to do is make it smaller, but also rotate it to get it kind of at the similar to the orientation I want it. Once again, Command T is going to allow you to do both of those things. You not only can change the size of that layer, you can move it by clicking in the middle and dragging, and you can rotate it by clicking anywhere around the outer edge and dragging that thing. So again, I'm just going to kind of put this up here. Yeah, it's way too big right now. That's fine. I'm going to hit the check mark, lower the opacity just like we did before so I can see what's going on. I'm going to zoom in like I did before. Again, this is a small area of the image, so why the heck would I want to be all zoomed out? And once again, I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, Distort. This time it's a little odd because I have already rotated it, so it's not like the image, the layer is showing up kind of at an angle in here. It's still going to work though. All I have to do is still drag these where the image looks like it should go. Again, I'm looking at the corners of the image, not the corners of the box I'm dragging. So there's that. And I don't know, that doesn't look too bad. I'm going to do things a little quick in this tutorial. I would just assume that you are going to spend a little more time and pay a little bit more attention to the positioning and the details in your own projects. Click the check mark, and of course I could turn the opacity all the way back up. Looks pretty pixelated here, right? That's just kind of the way it is. But we're really zoomed in, so don't worry if it looks pretty pixelated when we're zoomed in. I'm also noticing it didn't really go to the edge here. I could technically just go back to Edit, Transform, Distort, and now drag that thing a little bit bigger to compensate. Zoom back out, and there we have it. Now again, I think that looks a little too bright there. There's something something going on there that I don't quite like. So I'm going to just lower the opacity a little bit. Now we can also see some of those bars of the windows kind of showing through. That's just a personal preference. And I'm going to hit Command S again and save my project. So again, we kind of have two elements already on this thing, or at least I do. I'm going to come back to the fridge and close out of it. This time it's not going to ask me to save it because I forgot to auto-contrast it. I don't know if that would have made much of a difference here, but, well, maybe I did do something that it wants to save. Huh, interesting. Okay. What else can we do now? Let's look at the clock, which is going to offer us a slightly different way of selecting something. Now, for this clock, auto contrast is going to work fine. However, I took this photo, and the clock face should look way more white than it does. To me, it has a kind of a peachish, kind of a warm... like a warm tone to it, and I think it's because I had the setting on my camera wrong, so I had it set for natural light, and this was fluorescent light, so the color is off. Well, luckily, Photoshop has a thing called auto color, and it doesn't always work, but when you click on auto color, Photoshop tries to figure out what is supposed to be white, and it compensates for that. So what it did is it just found that most of the pixels in here were warm, had that kind of, peachish pink hue, and it compensated for it. I think it does a pretty good job. Now, instead of using the quick select tool, which we absolutely can do to do this, we could use the quick select tool. There's something that's kind of interesting and works fairly well some of the time. It's called the object selection tool. It's hidden right under the quick selection tool, or it was actually the tool you had to click on to get to the quick selection tool. And what that does is it allows you to drag a marquee, a rectangle, around the object that you want to select. I'm not saying it works all the time. It might not even work perfectly here, but if I drag a square around that, it finds the edge of the clock pretty easily. Another thing that you can do is you can just click Select Subject up here. But if you do that, it might think that this chunk of this shelf or whatever is part of the image, and it might add that. So basically now what I did is just dragged that around, and it knew exactly what I wanted to select. Basically, it's based on contrast as well. It's just a little quicker than doing the whole quick select thing. So once again, I'm going to select and mask. Again, it has that softer edge. I can tell just by looking at it. So I'm going to click OK. If you don't click on Select and Mask, it will not add that softer edge. You have to click on Select and Mask, then you have to click on OK, and that's what's actually going to save those parameters to the marching ants that we have. I'm going to copy it and come over here and paste it. That's a huge clock. The reason this clock is so large here is because the quality of the image that the clock came from is better than the quality of the image that we're collaging onto. Yeah, it just has this image has fewer pixels than the photograph of the clock. So Photoshop kind of conforms the object that you're pasting to fit the pixels, the resolution of the image you're collaging into. And that's why you have to sometimes do some of these adjustments. I'm going to hit Command T, and I'm going to lower the clock, lower the size of the clock. I'm going to put it up here, maybe rotate a little, I don't know. Click the check mark. Again, Command T, Control T on a PC will allow you to both scale and rotate your layers. Now here's the thing about sort of believability. Objects that are higher in contrast or more saturated are going to come forward. They're going to look like they're closer to us than objects that have less contrast and are less saturated. So right now, this clock looks like it's floating in front of my face. It does not look like it's way back in the clouds. One thing I can do to make it look like it's disappearing into the clouds a little bit is just lower the opacity, which will sort of do that. But it still is just floating there. Like, it looks a little odd here. I'm not super happy with that. Weird things just floating in the sky that don't look sort of integrated, just look hokey, I guess you could say. So that's why we want to try to make it look a little bit more like, let me see. Didn't realize I had closed that down, like this. So it's like, it's not, we can't see the whole clock. We can see a little bit at the bottom, a little bit at the top, not as much at the bottom. To me, it looks like a little bit more integrated. Now, there's a couple ways we can do that. One is we could use our eraser and lightly erase the clock, and we probably will get a good result. But when you erase pixels, you're pretty much destroying those pixels, and you can't really get them back. So instead of erasing the clock, we're going to do something completely different, and we're going to get the same result without damaging the pixels of our clock. And what we're going to do is, this time we're going to use the Lasso tool. The Lasso lets you make freehand selection, and it allows you to draw with your mouse any shape that you want, and it's going to give you the marching ants in that shape. So let's say I want basically what I want to do is I want to take a chunk of these clouds, and I want those to be on their own layer. That might be really difficult to do with the quick select tool. So instead, I'm going to just kind of draw a shape. I'm just freehand drawing this. You got to complete the shape. You got to kind of come all the way back to where you started. Now I have a selection of just the marching ants in the shape that I had selected. Sorry, I'm going to zoom in here to get closer to what we're looking at. And what we're going to do is copy and paste that background, those clouds, and put them in front of the clock. But here's the thing. Those pixels of where the clouds are, where the background is, they are on the background layer. So before we copy and paste, we have to make sure that we always select the layer that we want to copy and paste from. So this is not only can we make a selection in a different image, in a different whole different tab, and copy and paste into our image, but we obviously can make selections from our own image as well, which is exactly what you had to do for the Photoshop glitch project. So now that the background layer is selected, I'm going to click on Select and Mask. And here's what's showing. That's fine. I'm going to copy and paste. I'm going to name that new layer Clouds, not Clowns. But here's the thing. Why aren't those clouds obscuring the clock the way I want? Well, the layer is at the bottom. That's why. The clouds layer needs to get dragged all the way to the top of the layers palette so that is obscuring the layer below it. These layers now start to really becomes very important that these layers now are in the right order. So right now that starts to look kind of interesting already. Maybe I'll lower the opacity of the cloud layer a little bit. But let's say I don't want this fairly stark line here, right? It's like the clock's here, and all of a sudden the clouds start. Well, now I can use my eraser. The eraser is this tool right here. Looks like a little eraser. It is a brush, so I can come up here and change the size. But here's the thing. A lot of other parameters now with this brush. Do you want a hard edge? If you have a hard-edged brush, you are basically going to get this. It is going to erase those pixels 100% with a super crisp edge. Oops, which I don't want. I want a fairly soft edge. I kind of want these to blend a little bit more. So now when I drag through, it's a little bit of a softer edge. However, it is still erasing too much. So I'm going to back up. I think it's erasing too hard. That's because our opacity is at 100%. That is like, you're erasing really, really hard with your eraser. If you want to erase lightly, you're going to have to lower the opacity, which only means that you'll have to maybe pass over the pixels a few more times to fully erase them. But now we can just erase much more gingerly and kind of very gradually so that we have a little bit more of like a gradient here, if that makes sense. Now we can play around with the opacities of both the clouds and the clock to get the look that we like. So do I want the clock to be even more lowered in opacity? Do I want the clouds to be maybe even higher in opacity? It's up to you. But again, that just kind of blends things in a little bit more. So you can erase pixels. You can erase them, 100% opacity, or you can lower that opacity to kind of lightly erase. You can erase with a crisp edge, which is great. With a hard edge, I mean, if you want a nice crisp edge on your layer, or you can have a softer edge for more blending. Just be sure that while you're using the eraser, you actually click on the layer that you want to erase. Make sure that you have the right layer selected. Lowering the opacity of these things is non-destructive, meaning at any point you can always get your opacity back to the way it was. So again, now that clock, if I hide the clouds layer, that clock is still perfectly intact. The illusion of it being erased is due to the fact that we put the clouds on top and have, erased through to let some of those clouds show in front of that clock. I'm going to save this again. And what else can we do now? Something that's going to be a little more complex is going to be the roller coaster. I'm going to go back to the clock image and I'm going to close out of it. Don't save it. If your computer is lagging more than you would like when you're using Photoshop, the fewer tabs you have open, the better. So, if your computer's lagging by opening all these at once, just open one at a time and go from there. But otherwise, that's why I like to close out of them. It just kind of saves a little bit of resources. So here's a roller coaster. Once again, I'm going to do an auto contrast on this thing. Does a pretty good job. But look at the detail in this roller coaster. All of those, vertical and horizontal bars are like, supports, and the diagonal supports. If we want all of the negative space in between the roller coaster here, if we want that to all be transparent, that's going to be really difficult. Like, we could zoom in and try to do it with the quick select tool or the select object. Is not going to work. I guarantee you it's going to be very, very difficult. There's a much better way to do that. First, we're going to make kind of a sloppy selection. I'm just going to come over with my lasso tool, and I'm just going to draw a selection. And notice, I don't care that some of the background is there. I'm just going to cut through this whole thing. We're going to get rid of that background, that sky behind there, all that negative space with a different tool once we paste it into our collage. I'm just going to select and mask, even though I'm going to be erasing that stuff. Just get very used to clicking on select and mask because it's never going to hurt. So I'm going to copy and put that over in the tutorial. Now look what's happening. Like, why the heck is this going on over here? What's going on? The roller coaster did not have a chunk cut out of it. Why the heck is that happening? Well, my new layer now is below the clouds. That's why it looks kind of weird. So for right now, I'm going to put it above the clouds, just so I can see it on top of everything else. I'm going to rename that coaster. And now, how the heck are we going to get rid of all that negative space? In any collage that you do, if you have a intricate object like this and you need to remove all of the negative space in between it, especially if that negative space is all made up of the same color or close, right? All this negative space back here is pretty much consistently colored. If you need to do that, we're going to use what's called the background eraser tool. It's hidden under the eraser. It's called the background eraser. Now, the background eraser is a brush, just like the other eraser. We want a very large brush. This might look kind of weird, because I'm going to make it really large here. Like 200 pixels maybe large, or close. Because the way this brush works, it doesn't really matter how big your brush is. You almost can't have it too big. We also want to change a couple of these things, and whenever you change any of the parameters of your tools, the next time you go back to it, it's going to remember those parameters, which is a good thing as well. You don't have to, it doesn't reset every single time you restart Photoshop. We want this to be sampling once, and what that means is that when we click and start to color around, it's going to it's only going to remove the color that we first initially clicked on, which is exactly what we want. We also don't want it to be contiguous. Contiguous means that, I can just show you here. If the little plus inside of my brush is on the color that I want, if I start to erase, it kind of stops at the roller coaster, and it doesn't erase the things on the other side of all of these bars, because it is only erasing contiguous pixels that are next to each other. Once it runs into another color, it stops erasing. That's not what we want. We want it to be discontiguous. There's also a tolerance, and the tolerance is set at 50%. That means how tolerant is the brush to the color you're clicking on. A higher tolerance means that the color that you click on to erase, and every similar color is going to get erased. A lower tolerance means only the very exact color that you click on is going to be erased. Don't worry necessarily about that. 50% is usually good. We're going to experiment, and if it doesn't look good, we can change the way it looks. But now I'm going to click, again, I want my plus inside of my brush to be directly over top of the color that I want to select, to delete or erase. I am not going to hold my finger off the mouse, though. I'm going to click and hold my mouse button down this whole time. And then it's going to allow me to just color out all of that color from everywhere in that layer. Now that roller coaster is, all of that negative space is transparent. Not showing through like it used to. Again, background eraser works very, very well for this kind of thing. I will let you know, though, Photoshop does not know what the actual background is in your image. So it's not necessarily erasing the background. It's really erasing the color that you click on. If I had accidentally centered my brush on a tree, it would have erased the tree and not the background. So you kind of have to, just use that as you will, I guess. I'm going to hit Command T and make this roller coaster kind of smaller. Put it back here where I think I want it to be. The problem is now the roller coaster is in front of everything else. I can mitigate the fact that it's in front of this big window here by dragging it below the window in my layers palette. But I still have all this other stuff going on over here. And how are we going to fix that? Again, I'm going to zoom in here to see what's happening. I'm even going to turn this window layer off for a second, just so I can really see what's going on back here. Now, what we need to do is we need to bring all this, this part of this building and all of this building and this tree, we need to bring those forward on their own layer so that they can be in front of the coaster. And so the coaster is going to look like it's behind all of that. I'm actually going to try using the quick select tool to see if that's going to work. So remember, when you're trying to select something, you want to make sure the layer that you're trying to select is selected and highlighted. So I have the background layer selected. I'm going to come over to my quick selection tool, which is now too large. That's way too big for this thing that I'm trying to select here. And I'm just going to come along here and select this building. Select this part of the building. Maybe I don't even really care about this tree here. Select this part of the building. Something like that should look okay. It's not 100% perfect, and I do have some negative space of this blue sky here, but we can background eraser that, so that's not going to be a problem to fix. All right, that should look okay. I'm going to copy and paste that. That new layer now I'm going to call, I don't know, tree and building. Whatever makes sense. I'm going to turn the coaster layer back on, but I need the tree and building layer to be on top of the coaster layer, right? So that is happening. Some other weird stuff is happening. Look what's going on over here. I didn't select enough of this part of this building, so now I'm seeing some of parts of the coaster showing through. right? That's just that. Well, I can go to the coaster layer and just erase that. Why not? Erase it 100%. 100% opacity. Actually, I want a crisp edge too. I don't want a soft edge. I'm not trying to blend or blur anything. I'm just going to get rid of that. Make it look the way I think it's supposed to look. Now, how do we get rid of the blue here? Well, the blue that is in between those trees is on the tree and building layer. So we're going to have to make sure we have that selected. And then we're just going to go to our magic eraser. I'm sorry, background eraser, which is a little bit too big now. But it still has all of the other limits that we've already put in there. And we can just erase that. And now it should look like the trees in front of the roller coaster, just now way in the background. I can now turn that that window layer back on, save my progress, and we've added a new element to our image. Now, if we zoom in, can we tell that it's been collaged? Maybe a little bit, but that's fine. The thing is here that it looks good zoomed out. This is the way we're going to view the image. So, going in and worrying about tiny little details that maybe or may or may not even, matter, I would say don't waste your time doing that. Look at the overall big picture. Now let's try something completely different. I'm going to go back to the roller coaster image, of course, and close it out. This flag. I'm a Star Trek nerd. This is the United Federation of Planets flag. It is not even a real flag. It is like a bitmap or something. It's just like not good quality. It's very flat. It's more of like an icon or something than a graphic than an actual flag. So we're going to have to do a little bit of work to make it look sort of as real as we can, right? So it's like kind of flowing. It has a little bit of highlights on it and some shadows. Because this is, we don't need to really use a selection tool here. I'm just going to hit Command A. That's going to select the whole, that's going to select the entire flag. But notice select and mask is not a choice here. And that's because I don't have a selection tool selected. I have my hand tool from the last time I used it. You have to have one of these three tools here selected to even see select and mask. So I'm just going to click on my rectangular marquee. Even though I did not use my marquee to make that selection, it is still an option. Select and mask now comes up. It's going to click OK. I'm going to copy it. Come back and paste it. And I'm going to name my new layer flag. Move it up here. Actually, no. I'm going to kind of leave it, I'm going to leave it here first. And the reason I'm going to do that is so, because if I kind of make this small and zoom in, it's going to get kind of pixelated. I want to kind of see what this thing is going to look like once I start to modify it. And it might seem kind of weird, but I'm going to actually turn off my layers temporarily, just so I can kind of isolate that flag. Now it looks a little weird with that background. Again, that background there indicates that your image is transparent. So that checkerboard pattern is not like part of the image itself. So how are we going to do this? Well, first of all, we're going to kind of warp it to make it look like it's flowing in the wind. To do that, we're going to go to Edit, Transform, Warp. And basically what we want is we want to change this so that we have a 3x3. We want some kind of grid over top of our image so we can kind of push and pull things around like you'll see here in a second. So I'm just going to put a 3x3 grid on that. And now I can kind of grab sections and sort of warp them around. I can kind of grab, edges here. I have little handles that I can kind of, move around and change the sort of flow of that. You can click anywhere inside and warp it like that too. So again, this is going to allow you to have a more of a, to get like a sort of non-geometric shapes. And you just have to play around this a little. Do it until you like it. Experiment with, what you think needs to happen here. And I'm not going to make this absolutely, spend a lot of time to make this absolutely perfect. But, yeah. It doesn't look too bad. It's certainly not flat anymore. All right, so it's kind of warped. Looks a little wavy. But how do we make it look slightly more three-dimensional? Well, we're going to add highlights and shadows to it using a whole new set of tools called the Dodge and Burn tools. Now, the Dodge and Burn tools are right down here. The Dodge tool looks like a little popsicle stick. The Burn tool is a little hand. Dodging and burning are techniques and terms that are used when you're processing photographs. So like if you're in a dark room actually processing photographs, dodging allows you to lighten parts of the image, usually by overexposing it. Burning allows you to darken parts of your image by underexposing it. In Photoshop, they are brushes that'll allow you to lighten or darken your layer, pixels in your layer. So I come over here with the Dodge tool, which is again is a brush. So I get to choose my my size and I'm gonna say the hardness. We also get to change the range. So do you want to add highlights to the midtones or the shadows or the highlights? Like, do you want to lighten the darkest parts of your image, the midtones, or the lightest parts of your image? It's always set to midtones, which seems to work well. But if you're trying to do this to something and it's like, why isn't it working? Why are only the lighter areas getting lighter, but the darker areas aren't? You might have to come up here and switch to the range that you want to affect more. And then exposure is like how strong is your brush. So if I come along here like this, it's barely lightening it up, right? I'm just kind of clicking and dragging, and 50% exposure seems pretty good. I don't want it to be too much. The soft edge is also helping that as well. It's sort of like diffusing this and making it lighter, in the center of the brush, not quite as strong on the edge of the brush. And again, we're just like we're just dodging that to lighten it up. We're going to switch to the Burn tool, which again has the same parameters. Maybe I'll make this even a little bit bigger. And maybe I'll darken some parts of this to add a little bit of shadow. So again, it's a little, parts of this are now exactly the same color blue as it started, but now some of the things are darker and some of the things are lighter. Again, it still looks a little hokey, but it looks a little more three-dimensional than it used to. So now I can turn all my layers back on. Can move it up where the flag is going to go, which is way up here. I can hit Command T to make it kind of smaller. So that's kind of where it's going to go. But where's our flagpole? Well, our flagpole is whatever the heck that thing is, extended up, and the flag is sort of tied to that. So again, I'm going to zoom in. I'm not going to be all zoomed out trying to do that. Whatever that thing is on the background. So I'm basically going to make sure the background layer is selected to do that. And I'm going to use my quick select tool with a much smaller brush to try to get inside of that. Like so. Doesn't have to be perfect. Select and mask. Ooh, that's a little bit too much. Maybe I feathered it a little bit too much and smoothed it a little bit too much. So I'm going to kind of back that away a little. Now I'm just going to copy that. And when you copy and paste something from inside of the same image, it gets pasted directly over top of where it was copied from. But here it is. And now I can just move it up. Oops. Jumping around on me a little bit. If things are jumping around like this, like, I just can't get it in the center. As long as you have your move tool selected, use the arrow keys on your keyboard, and you can move things up and down, left and right, 1 pixel at a time. But I'm going to paste this a couple more times. Like, I need more of these that I'm going to move up. This needs to be taller. When you paste something after the first time, for whatever reason that you've pasted it, it ends up in the center of your screen, not where you think it might be. So you might need to move these things around a little. But now I have all 3 of these four of these layers are just kind of all together here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select them all. So basically, I just you can hold Command or Control on a PC, and you can just select each layer by holding Command, like one at a time, just like doing that. And basically, there's no reason that we need all of these layers to be separate. Like, why the heck would we need that? They're all making up that sort of flagpole. So let's just smash them together. We have a lot of layers here. The more layers we have, the more confusing it can get. So basically what I'm going to do is now right click over here, and I'm going to merge layers. And by merging those layers, now they're all one big chunk. And it's just not, it's not something that, we don't necessarily need all those layers to be separate. And I can just rename that whole layer flagpole. Now, this is not a necessity, but merging your layers certainly doesn't hurt. Now I have the move tool. When I click up here on the flag, it automatically knows what I want. That's because auto select is selected. If you're kind of clicking on something and it's moving a different layer, it's maybe because auto select has been turned off. If auto select is turned off, you need to click on the layer that you want to move first and then move it, or else it's just not going to do what you think it's going to do. So there's that. I'm going to just rotate that a little bit. And then it kind of is weird floating up there. And this is going to look really hokey, but you'll see kind of why I'm doing this here in a second. I'm going to hand draw some little rope, I guess, to tie on there. It's going to look pretty hokey, again, especially zoomed in. But when we're zoomed out, it's not going to look quite as it's not going to be quite as noticeable. And one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm just going to poke 2 holes in the flag, and I'm just going to use my like a 3 pixel brush, I don't know, something like that. And I'm just going to put some holes there before I sort of draw my my ropes. If you're doing any hand drawing in Photoshop, you want to, if we were to just to go and grab our brush tool, and like, okay, we're going to start coloring. Totally is going to work, but the layer that is selected is where that drawing is going to end up. I don't want that. I'd rather have my drawing on its own layer. How the heck do we do that? Well, we're going to come down here and create a new layer. At the very bottom of the layers palette, to the left of delete layer, the little trash, is a create a new layer button. And that just basically creates a blank layer that has nothing on it, directly above the layer that happened to have been selected. Of course, you can move them around, but I'm going to name these ropes. And now, because that new layer is selected, when I go to draw, that drawing is going to be glued to that layer. It's not going to go onto a different layer, which again we don't really want. Now, when you click on the brush tool, first of all, it is a brush. You have all those other things that we could always choose up here, like size and hardness. I want this to be really small. Oops, it's not stopping at 2 pixels, so I'm going to type in there manually. I also don't want it to be soft. I want it to be hard. I want it like a nice, I don't want it to be all blurry, and I want it to be at 100% opacity. But right now, my foreground color is black. So by default, your foreground color, which is what the brush tool is going to use, is black. There are a couple ways you can change that. One is you have this color spectrum up here. And if you move this kind of spectrum through here, this little slider, you can now click on any of these colors, and that will be your new foreground color. If I click on it up here, it's changing it down here. I want something brownish, something like that. And now I'm going to come over here and just draw a rope. What did I say about it being cheesy? Yeah, it doesn't look great, but you sort of get the idea. When I zoom out, it looks kind of like that. Right now, that flag is kind of standing out to me a little bit. I don't know. It looks a little too saturated. That's kind of a pretty intense blue compared to all this kind of grayish blue that's going on here. So what you can do, if something is too saturated and it's like standing out too much, not consistent with the rest of the image, select the layer and go to Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation. You've already used that probably in your other projects. And just desaturate a little bit. You can change the hue too. You want a purple flag? Go for it. Maybe desaturate it even more. I don't know. I'm just going to kind of leave it about like that. And I'm going to save. Now again, if I don't like those ropes, I could just turn the ropes off. I could delete that layer and start over again. It really doesn't need to, the whole idea is that now that is its own layer and you can kind of keep it all together. There's another thing we can do to kind of clean up our layers palette over here. And it's not something you have to do. But what I'm going to do is move the flagpole up so that the ropes and the flagpole are all together. And if I select all 3 of those layers, that I kind of know I want them to all always be together because they all make up like one object, let's say. If you select multiple layers and then click over here, which creates a group, what happens is now those layers are put in a folder over here, just called a group. And I could rename it and call it flag group or something like that. And that just kind of cleans up your layers palette. So now instead of seeing all 3 of those layers, I see a folder that I could click into and I could see all of those layers. And basically, it just organizes things a little bit better. So if you have a lot of layers that are making up like an object, and you always want that those layers to kind of always be together, create a group and let them just go into the folder, and it basically is going to get rid of many lines here, many rows of layers. You don't have to do that. That's just kind of an organizational thing. And now I think the last thing that we're going to add to this are the jars of lemons that are going to look like they're between, inside of this building. So I'm going to go back to the flag and get rid of that. No, I don't need to save it. These preserved lemons. This is a really low quality image, I can tell you right now, that I took with like a flip phone a long time ago. So it is not the same quality as some of these other images. But I'm going to do image auto contrast. It doesn't really change much, which is great. That means that the image already has good contrast. Is this object selection going to select the jar for me? I don't know. I'm going to drag a box around it like we did the clock and see what happens. Holy moly. That worked well. Look at that. It knew that we wanted the jar and only selected the jar. If you do that and it doesn't work perfectly, and you have some weird things around the outer edge, you can always switch to the quick selection tool to fix it. So if when I did the object selection, if that happened, and I got a little chunk for whatever reason that was over there. When I dragged my marquee around the object, I would just come over to the quick select tool. I would hold option and I'm just color it out. You can mix and match these selection tools as much as you want. You could use the lasso and then add to it with your quick selection tool, or remove it from it using your quick selection tool, or any other combination basically. Selected mask. I'm going to feather that a little bit more, smooth it a little bit more. It did not look quite as soft. I'm going to copy that and bring it over here and paste it. But here's the thing. With our jars of lemons, we need 3 of them. 3 different colors. Once you've already copied something and pasted it, you can paste it as many times as you want. I'm just going to paste 2 more times. It doesn't look like they're there as far as looking at the image, but you can tell that all of the layers showed up. That's because they all just got pasted directly on top of each other. Right? There's the one. There's the other. Oops. See, I don't have auto select selected on my move tool. So now I'd have to come over here to select this, to move that. I don't want to do that. I'm going to make sure I have auto select selected every time. Okay. Now we're going to make those fit. And the more I'm thinking about it, I probably should have made these smaller first. Oh well, I should have made it smaller and then maybe copied and pasted it, but that's fine. We'll just deal with this. But I'm just going to name this like left jar, middle jar. I'm not referring to where their position right now. I'm referring to the position they're going to be in when I'm done. Left jar, middle jar, right jar. Okay, which one's which? This is the left jar. I'm going to move this one out of the way. I'm going to hit Command T and drag that thing down. I'm just going to get it kind of in position and hit the check mark. I'm going to do the middle jar next. Now, maybe I actually am glad these are slightly different sizes, so I can kind of... So they maybe some of these in this window will look like they're farther away, and some will look like they're closer. Now the right jar. And now I'm going to zoom in because now I want to see where these things really are going. Again, I'm just going to keep hitting Command T until I like where these, the size and the position of these things. This one I'm going to leave a little bit bigger. This one I'm going to make it look a little smaller. Like maybe it's farther back in there. So there we go. But let's change the color of these. So I kind of talked about the difference between color balance and hue and saturation a little bit before. But let's say I want these to look like oranges inside of there instead of lemons. Well, I want to make sure the left jar is selected because that's the one I want to deal with. I'm going to go to Image Adjustments and Hue and Saturation, and that's because the difference between hue and saturation and color balance, to the best of my explanation, is that when you change the hue, it's affecting pixels that are it's going to affect the pixels that are higher in saturation already. So it's going to affect the pixels that have more color more than the pixels that don't have color. So for instance, if I drag this to make them look like oranges, the lid isn't really changing orange. All the black spots aren't changing orange. All these highlights aren't changing to orange. Just the lemons are, because the lemons are already very saturated. Unlike, okay, I'm just going to click OK. I like that. If I go to the middle jar and I go to Image and Adjustments and try Color Balance, and I say, yeah, I'm going to make these more red. Well, yeah, they're kind of looking like oranges, but to get the same orange that I had before, everything else turns red too, or a combination of red and whatever color it is. It's almost like color balance puts a colored filter over top of your whole layer instead of actually changing the colors that are already there, if that makes sense. But I don't care. That's fine for this. I don't care that that looks like it has a purple top. I don't want two oranges, though. I'm going to make this something completely different. I'll have some toxic green lemons there. I'm just going to leave the last one the way it is. Now we need to, basically get these to look like they're back behind the windows. And a couple of ways we can do it. We could do the same thing we did over here, and we could try to get the window, the bars of the window, whatever that's called, the frame, the window frame. We could try to select that and try to copy and paste it and bring it in front of the jars for sure. That is one thing we could do. However, we're not going to do that. I think an easier thing to do, and something that's actually going to come in handy, kind of a little technique that's going to come in handy, is to actually erase through the jars instead. So instead of trying to bring the bars of the window forward, we're going to erase through the jars. But here's the thing. Erasing through the jars is going to be destructive. If we erase through the jars, it's going to look good, but if we try to move those jars anywhere else, they're going to be erased like where these window bars are, so they're not going to fit anywhere else. As an insurance policy, I'm going to select all three of these jar layers, again by holding Command and clicking on each one. And before I modify them, I'm going to right-click and I'm going to duplicate my layers. When you duplicate your layers, you're just going to make a copy of them. Why the heck would I want to do that? Well, I'm just going to click OK. But now I have my right, my middle, my left jar, and I have copies of all the jars. Now I can turn off the original layers. I can even do this and put them in a group. Call them jars, maybe original jars. And then that way, anything I do to these copies, if I totally screw something up or don't like it, I can get rid of those and I can just come back and bring the original jars layer back up and start from scratch. It's kind of an insurance policy. I'm also going to do that because I do need to merge these layers together. If I'm trying to erase with the eraser, you can only erase one layer at a time. So I'd have to erase this jar, and then I'd have to switch to the other jar and erase that, and then switch to this jar and erase that. It's not really a good, it's not really how I want to spend my time. So I'm going to select all of these layers again, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to merge the layers together. And I'm just going to call them jars. Now they're all together as one layer. I'm going to lower the opacity a little bit. I'm lowering the opacity so I can see where I need to erase. And here's the thing with your eraser tool. So I'm going to go back to the eraser tool. I probably want it to be about the 3 pixels that I had before. But trying to erase in a straight line is very difficult with a mouse. So here's how you erase a straight line in Photoshop. And this is how you would draw a straight line with your brush tool as well. Same thing is going to happen. You're going to click one time where you want the line to start. You're going to hold Shift, move your mouse to where you want the line to end, and click one time. And boom, it erases directly through that. Let me put the opacity back up so you can see. So again, I clicked here. Let go of your mouse, hold Shift, come over here, and click one time again, and that's going to happen. So I'll do this, click one time, hold Shift, click here. Click one time here, hold Shift, click there. Now I can do all of these jars at the same time. And I'm going to have to do the bottom down here too. Again, I'm going to erase that, or lower the opacity so I can see. But now I need a much bigger eraser. Trying to erase the whole bottom of this jar with this size eraser, no thank you. I'm going to make it bigger. Oh, that's a little too big. And again, I can click here, hold Shift, and click here. Get rid of that. Click here, hold Shift, and click over here, and get rid of that. Looks like I erased a little bit too much there, so maybe I'll go to my Move tool and just nudge it down a little. And there we have it. They're kind of back inside of the building. Do I want them up full opacity, or do I want them to be lower in opacity? That's just personal preference. And then here we are. So we've collaged all these elements here, and now, now you can tweak things. You basically, I'm going to save it, and I'm just going to look around. Like, does anything look really out of place? I mean, yes, things look out of place, but do they look like, are they standing out? Are there some things that are catching your eye because they're too saturated, too high in contrast? Does something look just really off? I think that, I don't know, these jars in here look a little bit too saturated to me, as does the refrigerator. Like, there's nothing else in the background of that image that has that much color. So maybe I'll go to the jars, maybe I'll make sure the jars layer is selected, and I'll go to Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and maybe I'll just desaturate it just a little bit. Maybe I'll do the same thing to the fridge. Yeah, just a little bit. It's it's kind of interesting how just a tiny little bit of desaturation can really make things blend a little bit more. Of course, this photo is fairly dark, like it was taken at dusk. So, it's not bright. It's not brightly colored. It's not in the bright sun. Those things might not have been an issue if the photo were from a different time of day. But again, now you just sort of sit back and look and try to make sure that things look as consistent as possible. So I think this looks pretty good now. Again, I'm going to click Command S and save it. And the whole point here is that, you know, even after you turn something in, if we have a critique and people are like, oh, that's, you know, that's standing out a little bit too much. Wow, you could really use some desaturation there, or some, you know, maybe that thing's a little too high in contrast. You can go back and change this a week later. You know, you can lower the opacity of things. You can raise the opacity of things. You can just kind of do all the stuff that we've already done again, or just kind of modify some of those parameters, and things should work just perfectly. So again, this is a long tutorial, but there are quite a few things to cover here. So basically, to review, we covered the quick selection tool, which was the tool, the brush that allows you to color around manually on your image to separate things based on contrast. We use the object selection tool, or the object selection tool, to draw a marquee around the clock or the jar of lemons, which did a pretty good job of selecting those things pretty quickly. We used the Edit, Transform, Distort to change the shape of this layer and this layer over here. We use the background eraser to erase through the negative shape between the roller coaster and this tree. We use the warp, edit, transform, warp to modify the shape of the flag, and the dodge and burn tools to highlight and darken it. We use the brush to draw a little bit of rope there. And the lasso tool to kind of just do a freehand, shape of our clouds, and then the eraser to sort of erase through the clouds with a lower opacity. We use the eraser to, cut holes in our flag and to do a couple of other cleanup type of things. So there you have it. The Surreal landscape tutorial. Once again, when you zoom in on this, it looks pretty pixelated. The image wasn't the best to begin with. If you're using your own photographs for your Surreal landscape, which is exactly what you need to do, your images are going to look much more crisp and clear when you zoom into them. No question. They're going to be better quality than this background. But at least, again, when you zoom out, it doesn't look bad. That's the whole thing about pixels is, if you even a fairly low resolution image when you're all zoomed out can look pretty good, you might lose some of that quality when you zoom in. But that's it. So that's your first big major Photoshop tutorial. Have fun messing around with all these new tools.